Have you ever felt like no one around you can really see you? As if it were just a shadow walking through the crowd, completely invisible. Now imagine that this feeling is not just a bad moment in your day, but the entire summary of your life. What you discover now may surprise you, because that's exactly how it happened to him. A man who was once celebrated as a hero, but today walks the streets as if he were just a stranger, an inconvenient presence that no one wants to notice. It was late afternoon on some street in California. The sun began to slowly descend over the horizon, casting a golden, warm, and welcoming light on the sidewalks. But not everyone felt the same welcome. With slow, almost torturous steps, he advanced along the sidewalk. At 85 years old, every move was an act of courage. The veteran breathed heavily, connected to a machine he carried with each step, while his fragile hands held tightly to the metal walker that accompanied him like an old friend. Each advance seemed to cost enormous effort, but he didn't give up. I couldn't give up. Anyone who looked at that hunched-over gentleman, wearing clothes worn out by time, could hardly imagine that there was a man who had already faced brutal battles in the name of the country. A man who once ran towards danger without hesitation, protecting the freedom of those who now rushed past, looking away as if he were just an annoying obstacle in the way. And it is in this cruel contrast between the glorious past and the indifferent present that all the pain of his story lives. As he slowly walked down the street, the veteran observed the people around him. Young people with headphones in their ears, executives talking hurriedly on their cell phones, couples laughing carelessly, all completely oblivious to the presence of the man who, one day, had sworn to protect them at any cost. For a moment, his mind plunged into old memories. Medals shining on his proud chest, military parades, effusive applause echoing in his ears. How had all that disappeared so quickly? Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt the crushing weight of invisibility in the midst of a world that doesn't seem to care about you? If so, perhaps you can understand a fraction of this veteran's suffering. But what was about to happen that afternoon would make all that pain seem small. What came next would forever change the way he viewed the country he once risked his life for. He continued his journey with determination, but at that exact moment, little did he know that he was about to experience a humiliation that he would never forget. That peaceful, painful, and lonely walk was about to be interrupted in a violent and shocking way. But who could have imagined that a simple journey home would turn into a scene of so much cruelty and abandonment? Stay with me until the end, because this veteran's story doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning. And what happened right after he took another step towards home will make you deeply question the meaning of the word respect. Because what happened next was something no one should have to experience. Least of all, someone who has carried the flag of a nation with so much honor and pride. Without any warning, without any provocation, a man approached abruptly. There was no empathy on his face, only an expression of inexplicable contempt and hostility. Harsh words quickly echoed through the street, cutting deep into the soul of that elderly man who just wanted to get home with dignity. Before he could even react or understand the reason for so much hatred, he felt a violent push. His knees immediately gave out. The walker slipped from his hands, and he fell, helpless, onto the cold, hard pavement. There he was, lying in the street, vulnerable as he never imagined he would be. His heart raced, his breathing became even more difficult, and he felt a shame he had never experienced before. Shame at being so weak. Shame at depending so much on the kindness of others. Shame at having believed that everything he had done for the country still meant something. The attacker, not satisfied with such cowardice, snatched the cane that gave him extra support from his fragile hands and threw it away, leaving it abandoned in the middle of the busy street. No gesture of pity, no explanation. Just gratuitous cruelty and total indifference. As cars passed by and pedestrians pretended not to notice the devastating scene, he stood there, unable to get up on his own. Tears began to slowly flow down her weather-marked face, mixing with the sweat and dust of the street. It hurt more than any wound he had suffered in past battles. It was not just physical pain that punished him, but the deep humiliation of being ignored and abandoned by a society to which he had dedicated his entire youth. It was at that moment that two drivers finally noticed something wrong and decided to take action. They quickly stopped their trucks, hurriedly got out, and ran towards the fallen man. One of them knelt down beside him, gently extended his hand, and asked in a voice full of respect and concern if he was okay. The other ran to the middle of the street and retrieved the cane, carefully returning it to the veteran. For the first time that afternoon, he felt that perhaps all was not lost, that there was still a thread of humanity in that indifferent crowd. But before he could properly thank the two strangers who gave him back some dignity, a sentence escaped his trembling lips, revealing all the pain and disbelief that had been stored away for so long. "I've been through wars, but I never thought I'd fight like this in my own land." Now I ask you, what would you do if you had witnessed this scene? Have you ever been through a similar situation, or do you know someone who has experienced something like this? Leave it here in the comments, because your experience, your opinion, or even your feelings can make all the difference. Don't let this veteran remain invisible. Your voice is important and can change stories like this. If this video has moved you so far, like it now and show that you care. And if you want to continue following real, exciting, and necessary stories like this, subscribe to the channel now. Your subscription is more than just a click. It's a powerful statement that stories like this need to be heard, told, and respected. But it's not over yet. Because what happened when he tried to report what happened to the authorities is perhaps even more painful than everything you've heard so far. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. The attacker appeared as a sudden shadow in the veteran's field of vision. There was no reason. No exchange of words, no crossed looks, no prior discussion. Just an ordinary man, in simple clothes, who carried a contained anger on his face, a fury that looked for an easy target. And at that moment, that fragile gentleman, bent by time and battles, became the perfect target. The first word thrown was a blow. "Useless, old man," he said, his teeth clenched and his tone poisoned with contempt. The veteran didn't even have time to understand. The second word was followed by a shove. It was all quick, but slow enough for him to feel his body losing balance, the walker being pushed aside, and gravity pulling him down like a cruel punishment. The impact against the ground was dry, hard, merciless. The hands tried to protect themselves, but the weight of the fall was greater. The physical pain came first. Shoulder, hip, the knee that could no longer handle so much effort. But soon the emotional pain went through him in a much deeper way. He lay there, stretched out, with his face against the hot concrete of the sidewalk. The people around stopped for a moment. Some looked, others simply looked away, as if it were common. And in a way, maybe it was. It wasn't the first time he felt the coldness of indifference, but that was without a doubt the cruelest. The cane, his symbol of silent resistance, was snatched from his hand and thrown away, as if it had no value. The sound she made as she hit the asphalt was engraved in his mind, not as the sound of an object, but as the echo of something more symbolic. Respect being thrown away in front of everyone. And in that moment when his eyes, now level with the ground, searched for something to hold on to, he saw nothing. Nobody reached out. Nobody knelt. The entire city seemed to have frozen in a kind of collective anesthesia, where the suffering of others became a landscape. There on the ground, head spinning, breathing short, he felt something he had never felt before. Not even in combat zones. Total abandonment. The battlefield had rules. It had companions. It had purpose. But there, on that sidewalk, the only sound he heard was his own shallow breathing, trying to maintain the rhythm, while a high-pitched hum began to take over the environment. He tried to move, but his body didn't respond. The weight of age, humiliation, and pain had completely immobilized him. This is where the hidden truth of many stories reveals itself. The enemy is sometimes not on the other side of the world. He doesn't wear a uniform, doesn't carry a rifle, nor does he speak any other language. Sometimes the enemy lives on the same street, enters the same markets, and walks the same sidewalks. Sometimes the enemy is apathy. As he tried to gather the strength to at least sit up, his mind was invaded by images from the past. The military training, the screams of the sergeants, the friends who stayed behind in battles that to this day don't have names on street signs. All of this came back now, but not as memories of glory, but rather as fragments of a life that seemed to have lost its meaning. What kind of mentality forms a country where heroes are treated as nuisances? From then on, something inside him began to change. It wasn't revolt, it was a deeper, denser kind of sadness. A silent mourning for the loss of confidence in something he never questioned before. His sense of humanity. Because more than the push, more than the fall or the pain, it was the lack of reaction that hurt him the most. The absence of compassion, the absence of empathy. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when two people finally decided to stop and reach out, what was revealed in that moment was much more than a gesture of kindness. It was a cycle break, a chance to rescue something that was dying. The sense of belonging. It was there, among the concrete and dust, that a spark of hope emerged amid the shadow of rejection. Write in the comments, "This can't be normal." I want to know how you felt about all of this. The street remained alive, as if nothing had happened. Cars passed just a few meters from that man's outstretched body. People walked along the sidewalk, some quickening their pace as they approached the scene, as if haste could justify cowardice. Others glanced sideways, briefly, as if checking an unwanted reflection in a mirror, quick, silent, and then averted. One or the other mumbled something under his breath, perhaps a "poor thing," perhaps a "it's not my problem." And it was at that moment that the coldness of an anesthetized society became clear. No one stopped. The silence screamed. It was a deafening noise, the kind that pierces more than offensive words. Because what really hurts isn't what you say. It's what you choose not to say. The absence of attitude, the void between suffering and reaction. The city continued, with its sounds of horns, cell phone conversations, and hurried footsteps, while a man, a war hero, remained lying, forgotten, like crumpled paper in the corner of the sidewalk. In another time, this same man might have been greeted in the public square, received medals, handshakes, speeches about patriotism. But now, there on that dirty floor, with his body aching and his pride torn apart, he realized that time also erases memories and erases people. The institutional abandonment to which many veterans are subjected actually begins with social abandonment. Before being ignored by the authorities, it had already been erased by the people. There were children looking out the window of a restaurant, not really understanding what they were seeing. There was a young man with headphones who didn't even look up from his cell phone. A woman even slowed down, frowned for a moment, but then resumed her pace and disappeared around the corner. Indifference had many faces, many gestures, but only one message. You don't matter anymore. And the cruelest thing is that he understood this clearly. It wasn't the first time. I had already felt this same coldness in hospital queues, in public office corridors, in the impatient expressions of counter attendants. But on that day, at that exact moment, all of this was condensed into a scene as absurd as it was real. He didn't scream for help. I didn't cry out loud. I didn't ask for help. He was just there, lying down, waiting for someone. One, just one, to do what should be automatic, extend his hand. But time passed and help did not come. And the longer it took, the more he felt that this street was a cruel metaphor for life itself. A long journey, full of obstacles, where the only real support comes from those you least expect, when it comes. This is one of the hidden truths of our reality. We live in a culture that idolizes youth, productivity, and haste. Anything that doesn't fit into this rhythm is seen as a delay, as a burden. And the veteran, with his walker, his assisted breathing, and his memories of war, became precisely that in the eyes of many, a delay. A body too slow for a city that doesn't want to stop. A face too old for a generation that only wants to look forward. But what no one realized was that that body carried more history than all the buildings around it. That scarred face was a witness to decisions, sacrifices, battles that guaranteed the freedom of those who now pretended not to see him. The psychological impact of being ignored is deeper than it seems. And there, lying there, he had time to feel every part of it. Rejection is not just emotional, it hits the body, affects the beat, it weakens the lung. Hope slows down. And the more time passed, the harder it was to keep my breathing steady. The device he was carrying no longer worked as well in the position he was in. But still, he resisted. Not out of pride, but out of instinct. Because those who survived war learn not to surrender easily, even when the enemy is silence. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic. Because when finally someone who wasn't part of the crowd decided to stop, the atmosphere changed. And that stranger's reaction revealed more about the human soul than any motivational speech. What this veteran heard at that moment will echo in your mind, and perhaps even within you. Comment there. Indifference also hurts. I want to know if you felt this at any part of your journey. It was then that something rare happened. It was not an explosion of emotion, nor a collective outcry. It was something much more subtle, almost imperceptible to the eyes of those who were just passing by quickly. A sound of light breaking, 2 dipped headlights stopping on the side of the street, and 2 men getting out of their trucks with the expression of someone who already understood everything, just from what they saw in the distance. They didn't ask what had happened. They did not seek justifications. They did not demand witnesses. They just acted. One of them walked straight to the middle of the street, without fear of stopping traffic, picked up the cane that had fallen on the asphalt and held it with both hands, as if giving back something sacred. The other knelt down next to the veteran, placed his hand on his shoulder carefully, and without saying any big words, looked him in the eyes and said, "Let's get up together, sir." The way they spoke, the tone, the posture, everything showed respect. But not that rehearsed ceremonial respect. It was a real respect from someone who recognizes a story even without knowing the details. And there, between the 3, a different kind of silence formed. It was not the silence of indifference that reigned before. It was the silence of welcome, of "I'm here with you," of "you won't go through this alone anymore." At that moment, the veteran's journey took an unexpected and deeply necessary detour. Because sometimes, all someone needs to not fall apart inside is for someone, just someone, to break the cycle of coldness. And on that grey Saturday, it was 2 strangers who chose to stop, while so many others followed. And that simple decision had a huge impact, not only in the life of that man on the ground, but in the very perception of those observing from the outside. When they helped him sit down, one of the drivers asked if he felt pain in his ribs. He just nodded, trying to contain the tremors in his hands. He was breathing with difficulty. The oxygen tube had become misaligned due to the fall, and even so, he insisted on not complaining. The other driver looked around, irritated by the lack of reaction from the rest of the people, but he didn't say anything. He took out his cell phone, called rescue, and waited there with the veteran until help came. There was something in that gesture that said much more than 1,000 speeches. It was as if, at that moment, every second of waiting was also a silent protest against apathy. As the noise of the city continued, that small circle of humanity seemed to move at a different pace. And the most curious thing? Neither driver asked what had caused the crash. None wanted to know who the attacker was. Because deep down, what mattered at that moment wasn't the past. It was the present decision to do the right thing. This is where the hidden truth begins to reveal itself. You don't have to be a war hero to change the course of a story. Just be human. And in an increasingly fast-paced world, full of screens, distractions, and excuses, stopping to take care of someone is, in itself, an act of courage. One of the most beautiful, in fact. And when they finally helped the veteran to stand up completely, with their hands firmly on his back and arms, the expression on his face changed. There was still pain, there was still sadness, but now there was also something else. A spark. a small relief that came from the fact that, at least for two strangers, he was still someone who deserved to be seen, respected, and cared for. There was no applause. There was no audience. There were no headlines. Everything was discreet, almost invisible to the eyes of the city. But it was there, in that silent gesture, that the purest type of patriotism was manifested. One that doesn't need a uniform or flag to happen. The one who lives behind the scenes of everyday life when no one is filming, when no one expects. It is patriotism that shows itself in small acts, and that profoundly transforms those who experience them. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after he was lifted and safely seated, he said a sentence that carried decades of history and contained pain. And the meaning behind these words reveals more than any document or medal. It is this revelation that we are going to talk about now. Comment there. People who make a difference. I want to know if you have ever witnessed a simple gesture that had a real impact on someone's life. Sitting with his body still trembling and his breathing ragged, the veteran held tightly to the cane that had been returned to him with so much respect. The two men remained there, one on each side, as if they intuitively knew that this was not only a moment of physical help, but also of emotional presence. And it was at that moment that between one inspiration and another, he looked ahead, not at both, but at something beyond, and said, almost in a whisper, as if he were speaking to his memories, "I've been through wars, but I never thought I'd fight like this in my own land." The weight of the phrase was not in volume, but in density. She didn't need to be explained. It carried decades of history compressed into a few words. There wasn't just any outburst there. It was the kind of speech that comes after a lot of swallowed silence, after a lot of avoided looks, after a lot of neglect disguised as routine. And when he said wars, he wasn't just talking about military battles. I was talking about the war against chronic pain, against unforgiving time, against the oblivion of an entire country. That man had already faced minefields, freezing nights in canvas tents, urgent orders on crackling radios, gunfire from distant hills. I had already written letters with shaking hands amid the sound of explosions, said goodbye to friends who never returned, and returned with my soul in pieces, trying to pretend it was still whole. But now, in the middle of a busy street, surrounded by apathetic faces, the war was different. The fight was for dignity, for recognition, for a human gesture in the middle of concrete. And that changes everything. Because it's not just a question of the past. It's a question of belonging, of hidden truth. The war he faces now is silent, but no less brutal. It's the war of oblivion, the war of invisibility. It's the type of combat that doesn't leave visible scars, but that consumes you from the inside, slowly. And the most impressive thing is that, even injured, even humiliated, he spoke without revolt. There was pain in the voice, yes, but there was also a dignity that cannot be explained, it can only be felt. It was as if he was saying, "I know who I am, even if you have forgotten." The driver, who was still crouched next to him, was silent for a few seconds. Then he looked into his eyes and just nodded, as if he understood without having to say anything. There were no phrases, no empty promises. It was a raw, naked, true moment. And this truth in itself had the power to awaken consciousness. This type of revelation has a direct impact on our mindset. Because it shows, bluntly, how conditioned we are to look at others only when they are within a comfortable standard. Young, productive, active. The rest? We pretend we didn't see it. But a closer look is enough to realize that each invisible person carries a journey. And some of these journeys are more epic than any war movie. Therefore, this apparently simple scene carries an emotional weight that goes far beyond the moment. It is a portrait of a society that urgently needs to review its priorities, its values, its automatic reflexes. Because if respect doesn't start with our elders, with those who literally paved the way to freedom, then we're walking in circles, repeating the same mistakes, only with new clothes and cell phones in hand. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what happened after he was taken for care shows the other side of this story, the side of the system, The authorities, the cold protocols that ignore the urgency of the human soul. And that's precisely where the contrast becomes more painful. Comment: that sentence stuck with me. I want to know how she hit you. When the ambulance arrived, he was calmer, still sore, still heavy-eyed from exhaustion, but there was a different serenity on his face. The two drivers stayed by his side until the last moment, carefully helped him onto the stretcher, and said goodbye with a firm handshake, the kind that says more than any words. At the hospital, tests showed abrasions and a suspected crack in the rib. Nothing that required surgery, they said. Nothing serious, technically. But who decides what is serious when the pain is not just in the body? The next day, with his movements more stable, he did what any educated citizen would do. He went to the nearest police station to record what had happened. He went to the CHP unit, California Highway Patrol, and reported everything in detail. Time, place, appearance of the attacker, even the color of the t-shirt. He took the medical care note, the hospital guidance, and even mentioned the names of the drivers who helped him, in case confirmation was needed. But as he spoke, something already seemed wrong. The attendant listened with a mixture of impatience and disinterest, like someone who was more worried about lunchtime than what had just been narrated. The form has been filled out, it's true, typed there, mechanically. The bulletin number was handed over as if it were some kind of cold receipt. But no one asked if he needed follow-up, if he was safe, if he wanted to register any other type of measure. No type of referral, no human gaze. It was as if, instead of a beaten hero, he was just another bureaucratic incident to be filed away at the end of the day. And that says a lot, because what he discovered there on that cold counter was a hidden truth that many only realize when they are weakened. The system has protocols, but it lacks soul. He did his duty. He fought in the name of his country, returned to the country with less than he took, grew old without complaining. But at the moment when he most needed support, he was treated as a statistic, like a number, like a nuisance. In the days that followed, he waited for some contact, a return, a call from the police station. Any sign that this was being taken seriously. Nothing. No messages. No request for testimony. No visits to check your status. Silence. A silence different from that of the streets. An institutional silence which carries the weight of negligence. That echoes because it comes from where the support should come from. And here is where one of the hardest reflections of this story lives. It is not enough to just punish the aggressor. Omission is a form of violence, and when it comes from those who are responsible for protecting, it hurts even more. The frustration in this case does not come from physical pain. It comes from the certainty that, even after everything he delivered, he was still ignored. That the country he served with so much effort didn't even have the decency to listen to him seriously. This part of his journey reveals a behind the scenes that few want to face. The emotional and structural unpreparedness of institutions that should be the pillars of justice. It is in these details, in a hurried form, in a gaze that does not meet the others, in a telephone that never rings, that dignity is gradually stripped away. Because the truth is that the hardest pain to heal doesn't come from blows. It comes from the lack of response, from the feeling of abandonment. And this is not just an individual problem. It's a sign of something bigger, deeper. A system that does not recognize its heroes, that treats old age as a burden and not as a legacy, is fundamentally compromised. And when institutional coldness joins social coldness, the result is a spiral of invisibility that consumes the most fragile and abandons those who most deserve to be remembered. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because even in the face of all this silence, this cruel abandonment, there was still something he carried inside. One last gesture. One last answer. Something no system could take away from him. And it is about this moment that we will continue our conversation. Write in the comments. Being heard is also respect. I want to know how this part of the story touched you. He returned home a few days later. The body still felt the effects of the fall, and the soul carried marks that did not appear in the exams. He entered the door with the same care as always, placed the walker next to the armchair, and sat down slowly, as if returning from a tiring journey. But this time, there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't just tiredness. It was the awareness, raw and definitive, that now his battle was different. There were no more trenches, gunfire, or maps drawn with red lines. The current battlefield was silent, cold, and more dangerous in some ways. It was oblivion. And this is a war that no one trains to face, because there is no uniform that protects against indifference. There is no strategy against neglect, and much less a medal for those who insist on resisting while being ignored. But even so, he resisted. Because the true meaning of courage is not only in moments of action, but also in the decision to continue being honest when the world around us no longer seems to care. During the days that followed, he remained silent. He watched time pass through the living room window, where the sound of the wind hitting the trees was his only constant companion. Sometimes, he would take out one of the medals that he kept in an aged wooden box and hold it for a few minutes, as if remembering not just an achievement, but a meaning. And even if no one else asked about it, he knew what each one represented. He knew the price he had paid to conquer them. It's curious how things change. As a young man, he was applauded at ceremonies. I received firm greetings from strangers. He had his name announced over loudspeakers. Now, he barely heard his name being called in the pharmacy line. And yet, he was still grateful for life. Not because everything was fine, but because I was still here. Because you could still look at yourself and know that you lived with purpose. This mentality, this way of approaching the journey, is something that goes far beyond age. It's a state of mind. It is the ability to transform pain into dignity. And to understand that, even when the system fails, even when society forgets, history itself can still be a torch lit in the darkness. And it was with this understanding that he decided to do something that wasn't in the plans. Tell. Tell your experience, not as a complaint, but as a testimony. As an attempt to stop others from going through this in silence. Because that's the truth. Every time someone shares a story like this, it's like another medal is rescued from oblivion, as if time was looking back at the one who had been left aside. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that no one should carry the burden of invisibility alone, that there is value in the stories that are no longer told, and that yes, there is a real impact when we decide to listen with an open heart. You may be asking yourself now, but what can I do? And the answer, although it may seem small, is powerful. See, listen, talk about it. Don't let these stories get lost in empty hallways and hurried sidewalks, because when we recognize someone's pain, we break a cycle. We plant something new. A type of respect that does not come from formality, but from empathy. A type of memory that does not depend on statues, but on sincere attention. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened after that wasn't just an outburst or a memory brought to the surface. It was the beginning of an invisible transformation, something that started within him, but that slowly spread beyond the walls of that silent house. And understanding what this gesture revealed can change the way you see not only the veterans, but this entire generation that carries the weight of having given everything and received almost nothing in return. Comment there. This war is still going on. I want to know if this reflection also touched something inside you. If you've made it this far, this story has probably touched something deep inside you. Perhaps it awakened important memories or reflections about how we are taking care of those who once took care of us. If this content brought value to you, leave a like on the video. It's a simple and natural way to show that this conversation made sense. Oh, and before you leave, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. It's not just a click, it's a light way of saying, I want more stories like this. After all, it's stories like this that remind us of what really matters. And look, so I know that you've been with me until this moment. Write in the comments, this message reached me. It will be incredible to know that we are connected through this feeling. There is a video here that perfectly complements this topic. Click on it and stay with me there, because there are still a lot of good things for us to talk about.